Today on Founder at 50, my guest is Leslie Fine, a former academic turned product executive and now leadership coach who spent her career bridging the worlds of business, technology, and psychology. With a PhD in organizational behavior and experience leading startups like Crowdcast and product teams at Salesforce, Leslie brings a rare blend of scientific insight and executive know-how to everything she does. In this episode, Leslie opens up about her nonlinear path from academia to Silicon Valley and from building products to building leaders. Leslie shares lessons on navigating imposter syndrome, managing through layoffs, and the emotional realities of living in startup life. We also talk about her current firm, Enjoy the Work, where she helps leaders show up more authentically and be more effective, especially in high-stake environments. Now, I am a client of Enjoy the Work, but my story with Leslie began when our kids were at the same elementary school, which itself was, of course, a startup. Now, if you've ever struggled with confidence or wondered how to lead with more empathy and resilience, Leslie's story is full of grounded wisdom, practical perspective, and tons of grit. Let's dive in. Leslie, how are you today?
Doing pretty reasonably. How are you doing?
I'm doing at least pretty reasonably. It's a lovely day. The sun has come out here in New York, which it hasn't in like a week. So that's putting me in a really happy place. How's your week off to so far?
It is a time of transition. My son graduated high school last week. And so we're enjoying the last couple of weeks of him living at home and also releasing into giving him permission to do absolutely nothing every day. I think he's downstairs making homemade ice cream.
Love it. This actually brings us straight to our little story in common. My daughter graduated the same past weekend, and I know what she's doing right now, which is working very hard to finish her indie video game before she goes off to college. That's her heads down summer project. So she is probably not enjoying said weather. So we go back to parenting and going on parent camping trips and things like that. But it turns out that we've actually had some interesting similarities in our careers as product leaders. When I met Leslie, she was at Salesforce. But what I want to do is I want to go all the way back and find out how we got there and then bring us to today. So do me a favor. Where'd you go to school? And then what was that first job, or what were you doing in those first years after school? Maybe you were wandering the earth. Let's start back then.
I went to Wesleyan University back when mere mortals could get in. Pretty sure I wouldn't today.
I would never get into Carnegie Mellon.
Not a chance. The whole thing. Well, that's a whole different podcast about how ridiculous it's become. Be that as it may, I went to Wesleyan, which for those of you who don't know is sort of it puts the liberal in liberal arts. Definitely a school that if you wrote every essay about the essential duality of man and only referenced the Marx Engels reader, you would have graduated with 4.0. I
already don't understand any of that. So we clearly went to different experiences.
Yeah, you went to that tech school in Pittsburgh.
I know. What were you studying?
I studied political science and economics.
And while you were studying that, did you want to go into politics? Was there a thing you wanted? I also, by the way, studied economics. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer.
Okay.
And I think that was largely influenced by the fact that I grew up in a life like so many of us did, where there was kind of lawyer and doctor, and maybe if you weren't that good at talking to people, engineer. I didn't really understand what was on the menu. And I have a pretty big mouth, and people were always like, you would be an excellent lawyer. I didn't really understand that arguing and practicing the law were different. So that was a door that slowly shut for me as I learned what lawyers actually do all day. When I graduated at the time, and this will tell you everything you need to know about Wesleyan and the essential duality of man, the two largest employers of West grads were Goldman Sachs and the Peace Corps.
Wow.
You went one of those two routes.
Similar visions.
Very, very, yeah, values aligned. I had wound up spending a summer between junior and senior year working at Lehman Brothers on the convertible bonds desk. On Wall Street, double-breasted jackets, wear your jacket even when you're on the street, literal room where people smoke cigars. Like, it was the whole thing. And it was such a turnoff.
Okay.
So I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew I didn't want.
That's a great start. So I also don't think you did the Peace Corps. So what did happen?
I wound up being increasingly interested in sort of the economics and politics side as opposed to the finance and law side. And through the miracle of the Career Center, discovered a firm called the Law and Economics Consulting Group. also
Okay.
called LECG. They had a great rise and went public and then actually folded, but that was after my time. The LECG was anchored by David Teese and Laura Tyson, both professors of economics at Berkeley. Beginnings of the whole idea of information and attention economics was in this group. Hal Varian back in the day was also involved. There are some real people at the table. And they had a consulting firm that when there was a law case that needed real economic analysis, they would provide it.
Okay.
So I came on as a research analyst, which doesn't look that different from being an RA at a BCG or a McKinsey, but really focused on the more academic side. And I got to work on, this will date me a little bit, energy deregulation in New York, the Microsoft antitrust case, asbestos compensation, these major legal cases that at some point some wonk got on the stand and said, this is the economic damage or economic opportunity. That wonk was my boss.
Wow. So you got exposure to a lot of interesting things at a pretty young age. So you're at LECG. Did you have a vision of where you wanted to go?
Yeah, I would love to tell you that like I had the end in mind from that early stage and everything was a work back plan, because you know how much I love having the end in mind and having a work back plan. That was not my journey. Again, it was a little bit by exclusion. I remember having this train of thought late at night at the office, because we lived in a world at that time where if you were working, you had to do it at an office, building spreadsheets for Herfindahl indices. Doesn't matter. It was a measure of market concentration for the deregulation cases. And thinking and doing the math that my boss was making more money sleeping than I was at that moment working.
Okay.
And that I wasn't sure if I wanted their job. But if I wanted to be in this world, I definitely wanted their pedigree.
Fair. And sorry, just to make sure. So this is what, you're like 23, 24. Is that roughly right?
Yeah. 23, 24, living in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Office was a block from the White House. This was during Clinton, the good years. And it was super fun, right? Like I lived in DuPont Circle. I got to either walk or take the train every day to downtown. Like you would see the Dalai Lama go by in a motorcade. Like it was really cool.
And you're working on meaningful stuff. How did you end up from DC into the Bay Area?
Yeah. Well, I knew that getting a graduate degree was a no regrets move.
Okay.
And figured all of my bosses here seem to have PhDs in economics. That seemed more interesting than an MBA or a JD. I didn't really understand what that meant, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I decided that that would make sense. And I remember sharing with my then boyfriend, now husband, it's only worth going if you go to a top school and you get a full ride. Like that's what my bosses all told me. And there's just no fucking way. Like it's not going to happen. And so he and I made a bet. And I was like, I am only applying to schools in the top 20. And I'm not going to get in anywhere. And I wound up applying to 9 schools and I got into 7.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the sound I made. I was like, well, this was not okay. Well, I guess I'm going to grad school. One of those schools was Caltech.
Okay.
And my boss at the time was like, Caltech's really interesting. They're doing this weird thing called game theory. It's, kind of this nascent corner of the world. And he was explaining it to me. He's like, you love strategy, right? Like that might be a really good place for you. The challenge was that Ed was in graduate school at the University of Maryland.
Okay.
What was intended to be a PhD wound up being a master's in chaos. Not shockingly, if you know him, in control and dynamical systems, chaos theory, theoretical math. And so
I just like picturing Ed majoring in chaos. Like I'm just going to leave that as my sort of mental state.
This is where we are. And I called the head of the department at Caltech and I said, I got this problem. I fibbed a little bit. I said Ed was my fiance just to give it more gravity than my boyfriend. We were living together, much to my mother's chagrin, all of that. Now, Caltech is a really small school. My program had 10 kids in a year. And Professor Alvarez said, well, let me see what I can do. And I'll call you back. And he calls me back a couple hours later. And it turns out that Dan Myron, who is a professor in the department's mother, Rosie Myron, who is like this little French Jew who was like 4'9" on a tall day, was the admin for the head of the department that Ed would go to if he were to transfer. I mean, this is the way little companies, little everything work. And so Professor Alvarez said, like, what are his vitals? And I was like, his GREs look like this and his grades look like this. And this is like, here's his transcript from Wesleyan because that's where he met in college. And he was like, can you be here on Thursday? Like, can we just talk to him? And so we like cashed in all of our miles, and we slept on the floor of an ex-boyfriend's apartment. His cat had fleas. I wound up with fleas. And we flew out there and we interviewed, and they made Ed an offer too,
Wow.
which was
This story, it's interesting and different. Not only the only part that's not surprising is listening to you sort of starting to manipulate the system around you a little. So, okay, so you guys land at Caltech. What happens next?
yeah. So my old boss was right. Game theory was fascinating to me. That part I loved. The idea that you could talk about risk and uncertainty and incentives and preferences and altruism and spite and repeated games and all of that could be modeled. I love that shit.
Okay.
What I didn't really understand was that a graduate degree in economics is not more of your undergraduate. It's an applied math degree. And I'm just not that good a theoretical mathematician. So I clawed my way through it.
Okay.
I found experimental economics, which is the idea of like, cool, we have these theories. We've gotten a little better with this thing called behavioral economics, where we don't think of rational economic humans as being robots, but they actually have feelings. And those feelings are not irrational. You can model them.
It's not just guns and butter.
It's not just guns and butter. And it turns out that if you do something to be nice to someone, that's not necessarily dumb. That could be part of your utility function. So the problem is not with the human, the problem is with the model. Like that turned me on. But then experimental economics goes one step further. And it's like, cool, let's play a game. Let's build the game in a lab. Let's have people play supply and demand, trading a thing, repeated games, prisoner's dilemmas, whatever it is, with real money.
Yeah.
And see what they do. And so I helped run an experimental economics lab, and I got super interested in particular in auction design and in general, this thing called mechanism design, which is take game theory as a given. People behave in selfish, and I'm using air quotes here because selfish is not bad in this context, in self-serving ways to optimize their utility function, given the game that is presented to them. Cool, take that as a given. Now you're the omniscient social planner. You're the architect of society. You're making the voting system or the tax system or the way that promotions happen or how we allocate offices, which is a thing I wrote a paper on, or an auction, any of that. How do you design the game so that when people play it according to their own utility functions, society gets what society wants?
Okay. Makes sense.
So that's what I did my graduate degree in, particularly on auction design for, it was the Southern California Air Quality Management District auctions for NOx and SOx for dioxides. And my advisor had the contract to design those auctions. And I could talk for a very boring amount of time about why what we did was better, but that's what I did my work on, was auction design.
And so you naturally went to eBay.
That would make sense. No, I finished my grad degree relatively early. And so there I was, 28, newly married. Ed and I got married at the faculty club at Caltech at the beginning of my 4th year. The admonishment from my advisor was often, you're not publishing your wedding.
A little bit.
But, I initially went out into the academic job market.
Okay.
And inevitably,
wait. Before you do that, you're finishing up your degree, and therefore work is coming shortly. Did you have a moment as you're kind of switching, getting ready for that transition, where you knew what kind of job you wanted? Like what was going on for you there? How did you think about what would be next?
Yeah. This was a path of least resistance thing. The expected thing to do was to go get an academic job. That's what people with PhDs from Caltech do. And so that was the path I was on until I would get flown out to, the way the academic job market works is very weird, including going to the American Economic Association convention in a hotel, and every academic department has a hotel room. And so you find yourself meeting with like Harvard in their hotel room, and it's like 4 professors and you, and they're all like middle-aged white men, and the only place to sit in the room is the bed. And we're all sitting there trying to not make it awkward. Like, and nothing weird ever happened, but just the environment was so
I get it.
Weird.
But I'll be honest, no matter what you're going to tell me, I'm going to picture forever that this story takes place in like more like a motel, where all of them are outside and maybe you're going up the stairs and It's a little janky looking
Pretty
and,
sure it was the Boston Hyatt, but you can do what you
doesn't
want with that.
matter.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with my version. Okay, so you're off on this path and
And they fly me out, you give a job talk, and they send you out to dinner, inevitably with the one woman on the faculty who has tenure. And at some point, I would get a glass or two of wine in her. I'd be like, gosh, how do you have it all? How do you have tenure and a family and a life? Like, golly gee whiz, I don't get it. And they would inevitably tell me some form of you don't, that the body clock and the tenure clock are the same clock. And while I did talk to, some of the Harvards and MITs of the world, inevitably you're going to wind up in like some buttfuck little town and you're going to fight for the next 10 years for tenure and you're going to make like $3 while you do it.
so during that experience, you were able to find out that what you thought you wanted was just not going to be.
Just not what I wanted. Just not what I wanted. And meanwhile, there's Web 1.0 happening.
Yeah.
This is 1999 into 2000.
Okay.
Ed gets a job offer from Financial Engines, which was Bill Sharp's company.
Mm-hmm.
So, the pinnacle of academic geekery.
Yeah.
Gone industry. And my advisor said, I've placed other students who are more applied because one of my consistent themes in my career is I like building toys and see people play with them.
Yeah.
That's how I wound up in experimental. And then that's how I wound up at HP Labs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your advisor helped find you the role?
He introduced me to one of his former students who was there, a guy named Kayat Chen, who was like, we're looking for exactly you kind of people.
Okay.
And so I flew up to Palo Alto and, they've got the big old office on Sand Hill Road. HP Labs is the original HP building. So Bill and Dave's offices were like right in the middle of our workspace as a museum. Like you could go in there and like everything was exactly as it was. So it had like this serotonin history academic-ish thing that scratched that itch for me, but was more applied.
And I'm guessing this is after they've already acquired Compaq?
This was right around then. I believe Compaq was just after I joined.
And so what was your responsibility in the labs?
Responsibility is an interesting word. I was a researcher. The lore of labs, and my data is now off, but this is 20 years ago, is that, HP Labs has existed for 40 years. It has 1,000 employees. And in those 40 years and 1,000 employees, so 40,000 years, there have been 11 things that came out of labs that mattered. But those 11 things were responsible for more than 50% of HP's revenue.
Wow. Can you share any of the highlights of those 11 things?
The inkjet printer, the pocket calculator, the IA-64 architecture, right? These major breakthroughs that all came out of labs.
But those are pretty good.
They're pretty good. Yeah, those worked out.
Yeah.
And so, I wound up in a group called the Information Dynamics Lab.
Okay.
I was very interested in these things called prediction markets that, pop up every 4 years during an election, but they run all the time.
Right.
And I was particularly interested in that plus the emerging social networks we were seeing. Because we were HP, we had access to these two new companies, LinkedIn and Facebook. And we're studying these social graphs. My boss at the time was a guy named Bernardo Huberman, who came from Xerox PARC, another sort of luminary lab.
Right.
And he wrote a book called Laws of the Web. He was the first guy who talked about power laws on the internet. So, he was looking at contribution models. He was looking at how information flows. And I got really interested in that.
Okay.
And particularly got super interested in, can you take this idea of a prediction market and make it useful inside companies where there are very, very few people holding the information? And this is where sort of theory and reality and product all came together for me. And I started wanting to be a PM, even though I didn't know that's what it was called. Shall I tell you that story?
Well, that's exactly where we're going next. So what was going in my head right here was, all right, well, some point Leslie goes from research behind the scenes into running product for organizations. So I want to hear, was there a conscious shift? Was this okay, I want to go build and ship stuff, or was it opportunistic? Let's hear it.
A little of each. So I wound up building this mechanism that could work like a prediction market, but in small groups, and small groups like companies where information was not bubbling up to the top. And I always thought organizational design was pretty interesting and couldn't figure out why, there'd be ground truth of like, this thing is not going to ship on time or this product's going to be amazing. And like the bullshit meter kind of filtered it through the top, and then the real information isn't getting out there. So I was going to single-handedly solve information flow in organizations. And so I built that internally. We used it a little bit inside of HP. There seemed to be some promise. And I was giving a talk about this. I don't remember where. We were right across the street from Stanford. So it may very well have been there. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he was like, I'm in FP&A at EA, Electronic Arts, and I run a betting pool on when games are actually going to come out. And I just have a whiteboard and a jelly jar on my desk, and people put in money and they write down their bet. And God damn it, that's more accurate. So I think this stuff really makes sense.
Interesting.
And he was charming and British. And so I completely was like, yeah, that's what we should do. And I should leave my incredibly well-paying job where I have maternity benefits and 2 young children to go do a startup, because that sounds fun. And I hear that's what people do here in Palo Alto. And so, this is sort of my second cojones moment after talking our way into Caltech. I talked the head of HP Labs into giving me a license to my IP.
Okay.
So that I could spin it out and start my first startup. And that was Crowdcast.
And did you know what you were really doing?
What do you think?
What I mean is specifically what it would be to start a startup. In other words, like not just everything it takes to be successful as a startup, but all of the other.
No, I had no idea. I had no idea what it looked like, and I had no idea of how overblown my exceptionalism was, right? Like if people really knew the averages, they probably wouldn't do crazy things, but then we wouldn't have crazy outcomes.
That's fair.
No, I didn't know. And I didn't know even what it meant to be product. At first, we called me the chief science officer because I was the geek with the PhD. Then the running joke became, yeah, you're the CSO, but S stands for sales.
Who's the we right now? Who's the we to get when you got started?
Let's see. Well, it was Matt and myself, and a guy named Alam who left pretty quickly thereafter. And then, within a few months, we were at 6-7 people.
Okay.
We had a small amount of angel funding. We wound up raising a Series A, which at the time, a Series A was $2 million, right? We call that a pre-seed now.
Right. Now, yeah, it's almost like inflation, right? Like everything has just changed in so many ways.
But we got that term sheet the day that Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Wow.
Yeah, we were in the Plug and Play Tech Center in Redwood City, and we were on the last helicopter out of Saigon.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, and my co-founder and CEO was negotiating the term sheet, and I was like, I don't care if he takes my baby, just sign the fucker, just get it done. Again,
I think on your early term sheets for any founder, when I hear those stories of the people where it's like their first startup and they negotiated for crazy insane terms and got everything they want, I'm like, way to go, because those stories are so unbelievably rare. Whereas what you're saying is exactly how I start thinking is look, I just want the chance to run this company. We
gave away a third of the company for that $2 million, right? Okay, fine, great. I just want to do this thing. And so this is sort of the next iteration. If there is a through line here, it's I just want people to play with my toys.
Yeah.
Where I got more and more involved in the product aspect of okay, I built this thing, but it's not wrapped in a product that people can use. There was no dashboard. There was no permissions. We were going to launch this in enterprise. We had the contract on when the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was going to launch. Managed to talk our way into Boeing. These crazy contracts. And I was like, I don't know, I'm running in Excel.
But one of the roles that I end up talking about a lot, obviously, is product, because, to me, everything's a nail, right? You and I have that also in common. I never was trained to be a product manager. And in fact, I never actually worked for someone whose title had the word product in it ever.
Mm-hmm.
How did you approach sort of being a fish out of water, yet having that clear vision and knowing your ability to articulate it? So where was that for you?
Thanks for that. No, it was very much the latter. I didn't know what a PM, and also I don't really feel like the market knew what a PM was in 2008.
I don't know if they still do, but that's
fair.
That's
but
a whole different topic.
At least we now have it as the thing. And I don't know, there are certifications and career ladders, and what does a good one look like? This was just the person kind of sitting between the customer and engineering.
Right.
And that's very much how I thought about my role. I was just the interface between Mac getting them to sign on the line that was dotted and them using a thing. So, a little customer success, little product, little science, like all of those things were me because we never grew past like, I don't know, a dozen, 20 people. I did wind up hiring a small team, and my first hire is now pretty much my best friend. So that worked out super duper well. At least I got that out of it.
I love that. So take us to the end of this startup. What happens at the end of this journey?
One of the big learnings from Crowdcast was that politics matters. And with our product, given what you know about it, it aggregates information, rolls it up to the top. That all sounds great. It doesn't take a genius, although it didn't occur to me to realize that frontline people, ICs, people who don't have a game to play would love it. Super senior people love it. Middle managers, not so much.
Interesting.
Information is power. And the ability to motivate people towards an unrealistic deadline or an unrealistic goal is important in culture.
Right.
And I was like, fuck the man. I did not care about that at all. And I just kind of ran at it in the way that I want to do. And so we would often, the host would spit out the foreign invader. And so it became increasingly clear to me that what we wanted was we didn't have product market fit. And we did have some product market fit of using our technology in a softer part of the company called innovation. And so ultimately we wound up selling the company to a small company called Spigot that then got bought by a larger company called PlanView that was doing internal innovation, voting, and ideation. And this was the era of Jive and Socialcast and all of and CubeTree. And Enterprise 2.0, like I was at the first Enterprise 2.0 conference. So, it was part of that world. And we were like, well, here's a slightly more quantitative way to do wisdom of the crowds inside your company. So we rode that wave, exited the company, returned like $3 and a ham sandwich to our investors, and I remodeled my kitchen, right? Like, and that's the reality of so many outcomes. We read about these heroic outcomes. I landed the plane.
Right.
Cool.
And that really gets to a lot of why I'm actually doing this podcast, is to get more of those stories out there. Like, yeah, it's amazing when so-and-so exits for so-and-so billion, or biggest exit ever, this, that, or whatever. And the reality check is most of the tech acquisitions are small, right? They affect 1, 2, or 3 people at a time, right? And those stories are so offset by either the massive wins or massive fails that happen, right? The other stories that make the headlines, where you don't see a lot of headlines like startup raises $2.5 million and folds. No one cares. You raise $250 million and people care.
Or startup raises $2.5 million and exits for 8. Cool.
Right. Whereas in reality, a lot of people's lives changed because of that. So, okay, so you've got your $3, you've got your ham sandwich, and what happens next for you?
Yeah, I'll fast forward for this chapter a little bit, because I think the next chapter is played the game 3 more times. None of them were awesome. Learned some things. I made one little foray into consumer, realized I'm the kind of girl who likes people who buy things for money and that I don't really understand the eyeball game, and ran right into the welcoming arms of Salesforce. I was exhausted at this point. Like I'd taken 4 runs at it. I'd made a few dollars, but man, that was tiring.
Yeah.
And so I decided I wanted a real job.
And when was this? Give us a
little.
This
was 2000. I guess I started the search in late 14 and took the job in early 15.
Okay.
And I had 2 offers on the table. I had an offer from Google and I had an offer for Salesforce. And, I was able to play them against each other a little bit, and the equity got kind of interesting. And the overwhelming feeling I had was Google, and I know they've tempered this a little bit, but at the time, they didn't even tell you what job you were getting.
Oh my God. For those of you who don't know, this is totally a true thing. I was given a job offer as a Google PM once, but they wouldn't tell me what I'd work on. And there was only one thing I wanted to work on, which is why I came in the first place. Unreal.
The bravado that it takes to be like, hey, we're based, the whole impression I got, and by the way, the interview process, I'm sure you had this as well, was the weirdest thing. It was like, okay, we just bought Nest, and what we want you to do is invent a Nest microwave. Here's a marker and a whiteboard. Like, that was an hour of it. They had Picasa at the time. So my next interview was like, reconsider the pricing of Picasa.
Wow.
It was.
I'm trying to remember what mine was. Mine was pre-Nest. Mine was in the mid 2000s. But there was definitely here's a whiteboard, here's a pen, get going.
And so, Whereas Salesforce was like, it is for this job. Here is why we want you. We would like you to come in and tell us what you would do in the first 90 days. And here's access to all the research. And we know you're going to be wrong, but we want to see how you think. And like, there's this whole thing. And my friend Abder said to me, you know, Abder, look, if you want to keep being a kid and playing, go to Google. If you want to learn how the adults do it, go to Salesforce.
Interesting.
I was like, I kind of think I want to be a grown up. And so I took that job as the VP of product for what we called at the time data and analytics, because there was no AI for Marketing Cloud, because Marketing Cloud had the most data.
Okay.
And I was handed a team that we had just recruited out of LinkedIn to take the 2 billion emails every day were sent at the time out on Salesforce's Iron on behalf of our customers. Each one of those like 50 data points, metadata and all this stuff. And they were like, go do smart things. And that was the beginning of the first Salesforce Einstein products.
Okay. And so that was all under your purview.
Yeah.
Were there any, it sounds a little loosey-goosey. Were there KPIs? Was there something sort of holding your feet to the fire? How were you told to go build cool things?
Yeah, I'm being a little glib. It wasn't quite that loosey-goosey. It is Salesforce. We had purchased ExactTarget a few years earlier in Indianapolis. ExactTarget had purchased a collaborative filtering startup that was trying to give to the others what Amazon had. Oh, you bought those pants? Maybe you'd like this shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to build that as a generic offering that could be sold to the people using Marketing Cloud. So we were measured largely on attach rate, on use of the product. Salesforce is very clever about what we called the stairway to heaven, but like each next level of you want the enterprise package, you want the team package, whatever it is. And there always had to be a silver bullet of like, and this is the car equivalent. Like if I want that Bose system, I'm going to have to get the luxury package. It comes with a lot of shit I don't want, but man, I want that Bose system.
Love this.
And our job was to build those features.
Got it. Now, what I want to do is take us from Salesforce into the current world. So do me a favor, and we're going to skip most of your Salesforce journey, even though I'm sure that talk for a couple hours. I'd love to hear, how did you find Jonathan, and how did your combination make Enjoy the Work the entity I know of it as today?
Well, let me give you just a little bit of endgame at Salesforce, because I think it will explain a lot.
Please.
As part of the company's AI journey, it's not called Engineering Force, right? Like it's not actually the most innovative engineering company in the whole wide world. I know this is a secret, but we did get really, really, really acquisitive around 2018, 2019, which was towards the end of my journey. And we bought 20 plus companies, most in the AI space, most sitting on AWS, which caused a big internal kerfuffle about like, but we're the cloud company. And I was like, asshole, it means you own the data center. Maybe we shouldn't do that. That was a whole thing. But I got deeply involved on the product side of it, and wound up on the deal sponsor as one of the deal sponsors on some of the deals. And I'll skip all the details, but I just fell all the way back in love, Jeremy. Like I wanted to be on that side of the table. And I knew that I wanted to leave Salesforce. I knew that if I were ever going to work at a big company, I should never leave, because it's a really good big company. Like, given everything I've said, I think it's an awesome firm.
I mean, it's one of those few companies that if someone were to tell me like pick 10 companies you think you'd be okay working for, having almost no interest in that side of the world and that tech, just as a media guy, it still would probably make my list, because you only hear amazing things from the top down over there. Yeah,
I'm a big fan. I think they really culture as an asset is a big lesson I learned at Salesforce. Like we can talk about that on another podcast. But I fell all the way back in love. I knew I didn't want to start another company. I just didn't have that kind of juice. This is around when I met you. And so I had elementary school aged kids. I didn't have a thing in the world that I had to do, no matter if I had to give away my like left arm to do it. Didn't have that. Didn't want to be in venture. It's about deal flow and finance, and that's not who I am. Inevitably, I would get called to be the CPO of some Series C or D company where they were ready to have some grown-ups at the table. And I was the equivalent of no one gets fired for buying IBM. You're a female PhD from Salesforce who's done AI? Like, come here, little girl. But man, it was being the nanny for someone else's baby.
Yeah.
And there just wasn't enough equity left at that point to make sweating blood for the next 5 to 10 years worth it.
By the way, we could double click on that topic alone for an episode, but I want to make sure we get to the enjoy the work story. So what
Well,
happened?
and then comes having a drink with a friend. That friend was Jonathan, and saying, I'm trying to figure out what's next. Brooke said that we should talk. Start telling him this stuff, and you know him well enough to know that like you can see when the switch flips.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think I know what you should be doing next. And can you stay for dinner? This was at San Coal Valley, in his valley. And that was the beginning of a 6-month conversation where he told me about this weird idea that he'd been working on.
Did he have a name for it at the time?
Oh, yeah. It was called Enjoy the Work,
It was.
although we masked it behind ETW Advisors because that sounded a little more corporate. And I think part of his journey was kind of getting fully embodying Enjoy the Work and being like, nope, that's who we are. We're going to take our work seriously and ourselves not at all. The thesis was functionally the same, although our wording for it wasn't quite as crisp. He had been, after his startup journey, asked to like come in and like, I need you to replace the CEO because he's not good at his job or because the company has outpaced him. And he developed the thesis of, well, what if we just help the CEO be good at the job? And started playing with that and had 2 or 3 other partners at the table and was convincing me that this is what I should do next. It took me 6 months to say yes. And if you'll indulge me in a Jonathan story, the moment that I was like, nope, this is what I'm doing. I called him about 5 months into this and I said, I'm falling in love. And when like my heart wants something, I like try to go listen to my head. And so I wrote a document called This is a Terrible Idea. And, I've been thinking about all the ways that this could go wrong. And most people would have like been like, let me send it to you and I'll help de-risk it. Let me help you get over the concerns, whatever. He instead leaned all the way in and said, oh my God, that sounds like so much fun. I'm going to make one too. And then let's compare documents. And we got together and compared documents of why this was the stupidest idea I ever had.
And now you're still doing it how many years later?
Yeah. So fast forward 6 years. So we are 9 partners, a little bit more professionalized than we were 6 years ago. We've now worked with about 180 companies. And for those in your audience who don't know, our thesis is, and we've covered a little bit of this sort of today, if you ask someone what makes a great founder, they're going to give you all kinds of personality characteristics, some of which we've uncovered about me, right? Like you've got grit, you've got a weird way of looking at the world, you're convincing enough to convince other people to come with you or give you money, you're iconoclastic, right? Like all of this stuff, you can't not do it. Those are personality characteristics.
Okay.
Guess who makes a great CEO? They can run a fundraising process, they can manage a board, they can hold people accountable, they can build a culture, they can get a deal done. They're good negotiators and a host of other skills. There is no conceit on how a founder becomes a CEO. And that's all we obsess about.
That is a great way to frame it. I really like that. And for full transparency, by the way, I have been a client of formerly ETW Advisors. And so that's, I just want to make sure that that's out there. Yeah. But as I have said to others since I've been a referral, unquestionably of all of the external money I spent at my startup, the best, hands down. No disrespect to everybody else I've crossed paths with, but Jonathan plus Co have been transformative for me as an individual and as a leader. So I would go on more effusively, but I want to make sure we're talking more about you. So here's my first little looking back question before we go to looking forward. If you could pick any given moment, whether you're at LECG, at Caltech, or even at your startups, if you could pass a note to yourself, and that note does not include like buy Bitcoin or Zoom stock or whatever, and you're also not at risk of like a sliding doors moment, like, oh, poof, now you never had kids or whatever. Just you're not going to change the full trajectory, but you might shape yourself a little bit more along the way. Mm-hmm. What might be in that note? I'm usually more eloquent with the exact wording. So I'm just going to say the idea out loud and maybe we'll get to the wording along the way. It definitely would have to do with deprioritizing being right. Interesting. I think that Crowdcast taught me this. Shipping my first AI products, that I was so obsessed with getting the math right that I didn't think about what the user wanted. That being in love with how to do things rigorously or right and deprioritizing how what I was doing was being received. Yeah. Either as in sales or in product, and like really under prioritizing the acceptance of what I was doing over the correctness of what I was doing. I love that. I really do. I'll tell you my sort of very simplistic, crude version is I often say, like, I like to quote Pulp Fiction and Marcellus Wallace, which is basically fuck pride. But it's in a very similar vein, right? The more we can know we're probably right, and that's probably enough, and maybe we're not, but it's going to get the deal done or the ball moved downfield or the product shipped or whatever the thing might be.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I absolutely need to fuck pride, and that's still a thing I'm working on. I think my twist on it here would be fuck precision.
Like that. Okay. So, with all that now, and we've got the journey behind, how do you define success today?
Well, this is kind of an answer. One of my favorite words is leverage. Like, if I can do a small thing that has an outsized impact on one or more people, that's how I want to spend my time. Right? I'm looking for leverage in the way I work. I'm looking for leverage in the way that I live my life. And I definitely one of the things I love most about Enjoy the Work is I have leverage through my founders. You know, I can tell them a small thing and it changes everything. Serena Williams has a coach. She is great at what she does, but she still has a coach. That coach is not as good a tennis player as she is. And because he is watching her forehand all day long and says, you know what, if you just rotated the hand a little bit at the end, it'd be way more powerful. And that changes her swing. Man, I love that. And when I see that in my founders or in my family, that gives me all the nachas.
It's so great to hear. It's funny because I will overshare, and if Jonathan ever listens, one of my favorite things about my interactions with him is the thing that points me in a direction where I can then, on the next time we're having a session, say, well, remember that thing you told me like 5 months ago? Here's how I applied it, and here's what's happened for it. And watching him enjoy knowing he had that leverage moment, you know, I get how that builds within you guys because it's so prevalent and so there. Leslie, thank you so much for giving the time today. This was phenomenal. Your journey is amazing, and I hope so many people are listening and seeing how you can take a walk through academia and practicality, big company, little company, and really make a difference with people. Thank you once again for all the advice you've given me and hopefully some leverage gained there.
Indeed, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for listening.
Have a great one.